Thank you. Thank you.
We didn't say thank you to Sophia.
So we move on to a presentation tonight concerning the Ku-ring-gai community, and we have two presenters. Actually, it's a presentation that was prepared by Mrs. Azizeh Erfanian. Azizeh holds a degree in Persian literature from Tehran University, and she was a high school teacher in Iran before migrating to Australia from England. And you may know Azizeh from the many years, 14 years she was working at the National Office under several National Secretaries, Dave Todd, Peter DeVogel, Irene Jones, Stephen Hall, and John Walker. And she's also served on several assemblies in Australia, in North Sydney, Baulkham Hills, Hornsby, and Ku-ring-gai. Now, Azizeh is assisted in this presentation by Farin Sanaei. Farin arrived in Australia in 1983 under the refugee program that we have mentioned several times. He's qualified in telecommunications and fiber optics from the University of New South Wales. And he and Felicity have been members of the Ku-ring-gai community originally in 1997. They moved away for a while, and then from 2007, they became part of that community again. So tonight we have a presentation about the history of the Ku-ring-gai community from the years 1949 to the present time. So welcome to Azizeh and to Farin. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate all the hard work you've been doing organizing these sessions. Good evening, everyone. And also, I just wanted to say a few words before we get into the history of Ku-ring-gai. I mean, it's been so wonderful and eye-opening to kind of see the history from day one in this country, that it's see the love, the labors, the enthusiasm, the hurdles that it's gone through. And all of a sudden in 1983, to parachute to the Australian community and see this wonderful community all of a sudden, and family, you know, families like Hassels and Zanes and Fred and Eva Grant and many others. It just took us as a kind of, you know, their sons and daughters, and it was wonderful. And I can see that how history is kind of showing us that these milestones in the history of the Baha'i community, and each time we see the love, the labor, the challenges that's coming with it. So it's really eye-opener. I'm not a historian. I don't think I'll ever be one, but I think it shows the significance of looking at these things. So really thank you, Graham, for setting up these sessions. Tell us a bit more. This is started a few years ago when she came to the assembly, said, you know, I think it's about time we sort of look at the history of Ku-ring-gai. Let's not forget it. Things are getting moving fast. And the assembly thought that was a fantastic idea. So as Graham said, 1949, when the Baha'i community started in Ku-ring-gai till 2019, that's about 80 years all up. And that's a lot of history. And I think there's a lot of communities in Australia, around Australia, that have this kind of rich history, and it would be wonderful. I really encourage to kind of somebody take this on and have a look at it, and perhaps at least collect as many things as we can. We've gone through some of the documentation in our little archives and in the National Archives. We find bits and pieces, but we haven't been able to find all of it, especially in terms of photos and some of the documents that it's been kept, it's just disappeared. So I really think that, you know, if you get a chance, and not an urgent thing, but it's really for the community who has a bit of history, start putting it there, because just like we do today, in about 50 years time, people are going to be looking at it and wow, what an amazing community. Anyway, I'll move on to what we're going to talk tonight. There's a lot to talk about, but we're going to concentrate more on the early years than the later years. So as just that, you know, if you don't know where Ku-ring-gai community is, there's a picture of this here. If you can see it, I'm not sure you can or not, but I'll make it a little bit bigger. So if you can, it's the house of worship is in Terry Hills, and it's just So just Ku-ring-gai is next to next neighborhood to the Northern Beaches, which is the host to the Baha'i House of Worship, and it consists around 120,000 people. So just a background there. So I'm just going to hand over to Azizeh Erfanian to take us through the event. There you go.
Aloha, everyone. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David and Sue. It was a pleasure meeting you through this, kind of communication. We worked together for a few years, and I always cherish the years I was there at the beginning of my work at the national office, and I learned a lot from David. Thank you for the memories. I put a history of the Baha'i community of Ku-ring-gai together. So I'm starting from the very first letter which I found in the archives that brings the beginning of this community. It was in 1949 that the group of Baha'is, including Mr. Noel and Mrs. Bessie Walker, and Miss Margaret de Goodhardy, living in the municipality of Ku-ring-gai, sent a letter to the National Spiritual Assembly of Australia and New Zealand, requesting that they be registered and legally recognized as the Baha'i community of Ku-ring-gai. Okay, as you can see that letter, the National Assembly says, "Dear Baha'i friends, aloha pa. At the recent meeting of the National Spiritual Assembly, your newly formed group was one of the joint notes of the meeting. We know you will all arise as one soul in many bodies and will serve his faith as never before. As the time is short, we are told, so altogether we must strive to fulfill the commands ordained by Baha'u'llah for this day and age. We know you will work constantly with this one aim in view, that you will consolidate your group into assembly status. Please convey our loving greetings to all members of your group in his service." In September of 1949, Mrs. Dorothy Rookwood became the first person to declare in Ku-ring-gai community. In 1950 to 1951, this group continued meeting during that time and consisted of 4 members, Mr. and Mrs. Walker, Mrs. Dorothy Rookwood, and Miss de Goodhardy. Within 1 year, 2 new members joined the group. Group meetings, feasts, and study gatherings were held regularly to strengthen their membership, and the group considered advertising in the local papers at that time, such as Broadcaster, the Courier, and the Recorder, to inform the public when there were special occasions. In 1952, the group had combined meetings with the North Sydney group as it had lost some of its members. Feasts regularly were joined together. The two communities collaborated in holding an advertised lecture in North Sydney and showing of the film The Persian Garden at Roseville. The events were so well attended that it was difficult to accommodate all those who came on that second night. In 1953, early in the year, it was decided that the members of the group concentrate their efforts teaching in towns that formed part of the national plan. At that time, forming an assembly in Ku-ring-gai was not part of the national plan. In pursuit of this decision, members visited Wollongong, Newcastle, and other goal areas, and at the same time held regular firesides in Ku-ring-gai. Their efforts produced results, and membership in Ku-ring-gai grew to 9. In a letter to the National Assembly on 21st of March 1953, the group announced through a joint declaration signed by 9 members who were present and willing to serve on the Assembly that the declaration was done in accordance with the statement in the Baha'i community that where there are 9 members enrolled within a jurisdiction, an assembly should be formed. So the assembly, the spiritual assembly of the Ku-ring-gai was formed on 21st of April, 1953. And the members were, Mrs. Doris Whiting, Mrs. Margaret Bolton, Miss Reynolds Noland, Mrs. Edna Williams, Mrs. Margaret de Goodhardy, Mrs. Bessie Walker, Mr. H.B. Reiner, Mr. Noel Walker, Mr. Stanley Bolton. The National Assembly wrote on 13th of May 1953, "We are indeed happy to inform you that during its recent meeting, the National Assembly passed the following resolution, that the formation of Port Adelaide, Wollongong, Suva, Payneham, and Ku-ring-gai as spiritual assemblies be recognized." 2 hands of the cause of God, Mr. Frutan and Mr. Faizi, during their visit to Australia, attended and gave talks at the function in Ku-ring-gai. Their talks were very much appreciated, and the companionship with these 2 wonderful souls was a spiritual stimulation to the young community. In 1954, the community was grieved by the news of passing of the hand of the cause Dorothy Baker, and a letter of sympathy was sent to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States.
Okay, it's my turn now. In 1955 and 56, following the presentation of Baha'is in Iran, following the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran that supported by the government, on the 6th of June, the Spiritual Assembly of Ku-ring-gai sent an international telegram to the Shah of Iran. His Imperial Majesty Shahanshah Muhammad Reza Tehran Iran humbly request personal investigation, distressing reports, persecution Baha'is Iran, stop firmly believe accusations against Baha'is, misrepresentation, true facts, stop, wish affirm Baha'i faith undeniably non-political, teaches emphatically divine origin, Islam, views Iran, special light, land of origin, pilgrimage, stop earnestly appeal, Our Majesty extend protection, seek justice, alarming situation stop. The chairman of the assembly. So it was a very interesting thing to see that even as early as that, Ku-ring-gai was quite outspoken in terms of writing to that. And also on the 14th of June, they wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Iran. Dear sir, on behalf of the Baha'is of Ku-ring-gai in the state of New South Wales, Australia, I appeal to you to use your influence to stop the persecution of Baha'is in your country, whose plight is such as I'll try. Maybe it just doesn't like me, so I think it prefers the author to talk.
I think you're using a tablet and you have to be centered.
That. Sorry, continuing. These unfortunate people are obliged by their fate to take no part in politics, but to uphold the authority of the constitutions and to recognize the divine origin of Islam. Through the practice of their faith and good example, they have taught the people of the Christian world to accept the teaching of the Prophet and have imbued them with such a love of Iran as the birthplace of their faith that it has become a place of pilgrimage for Baha'is all over the world. I therefore beg of your government to thoroughly investigate the charges against the Iranian Baha'is and allow them justice. It is felt that their case has been misrepresented, as these people, with their high standard of education and integrity, could only be of benefit to any country. Respectfully, yours, Secretary. So there's a quite, again, interesting piece of history here. In 1957 and 58, Ku-ring-gai Assembly sent a cable to Shah expressing their gratitude after the Baha'i victories in Iran. And as you know, I think they stopped, killing some of the Baha'is that was planned at that time. In 1959 and to 1961, at some stage at that between 2 years, it's lost its status as an assembly due to its members moving out of Ku-ring-gai community. And we don't have a record of who they are, but if anybody knows, and I know that some people have actually lived in Ku-ring-gai who are on the call on the session here tonight. If you know of anything, please do let us know. We'll really appreciate via Gram, or I'll put my email up there as well. National Assembly during those 2 years wrote to the Ku-ring-gai community giving guidance on regaining its status and firmly establishing the assembly again. On April 1961, the group sent a letter to the National Assembly, which again informed them of the intention of forming a local assembly. And I think the local assembly formed on that year, and the office bearers were those people. Stanley Bolton was the chairperson, David Podger was the treasurer, Doris Whiting, secretary. And in 1962, assembly formed on the April 1962 by a joint declaration, and the National Assembly wrote that the National Spiritual Assembly instructed me to advise you that in 3 months' time, the Spiritual Assembly of Ku-ring-gai to commence its incorporation by writing to the National Spiritual Assembly's legal officer. In the meantime, it is necessary that the community make every effort to build up its member to 12 active believers needed to assure a strong spiritual assembly. Being close to the Mother Temple puts the Ku-ring-gai community in a unique position, and Assembly from time to time made recommendation to the National Assembly for the improvement of the house of worship, such as choir, singers, public access services, lighting during the night, arranging transport for large services, guiding and signage and handrail for their steps. Many of those suggestions were approved and implemented. Between 1963 and 65, community activities included, similar to many of communities around Australia, fireside, day prayers at the house of worship, public lectures, publicity in the Sydney Morning Herald and the Courier, a display of books and pictures exhibited in Sanaei's agricultural show, a display box at Linfield Station was rented, its display material charged regularly. Members of the community assisted teaching effort in Lismore, Tamworth and other towns in New South Wales. And in 1966, when the high school was established in Turramurra, with its motto being harmony in diversity, the Assembly donated a copy of the Paris talk to the school library, drawing attention to the talk by Abdul Baha on the subject of harmony in diversity. And I think this is, I'll pass it on to Azizeh Khanum again. And
Yeah. All right. Am I okay now with my voice? Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Ross and Mrs. Garcia Ross were speaker at the public meeting at the Pimble Community Center to an audience of 35, which 10 were members of the public. Advertising at the Linfield station box and the newspapers continued. On the occasion of Mr. Mark Towers' visit, a Baha'i from the United States, who toured Australia giving talks on Baha'i faith, a full item of news article by the Public Relations Committee was published in the Courier. Promotion of public meetings drew a good number of attendants from the public to the event. On 12 November, in celebration of the birth of Baha'u'llah, a function was held at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Bolton, which the mayor of Ku-ring-gai and his wife attended. The mayor was presented with several books, including the Proclamation of Baha'u'llah. In 1969 to 1970, on 27th of October, the National Assembly wrote that the National Assembly has made travel arrangements for Hand of the Cause Enoch Olinga during November and December. It was the intention of Mr. Olinga to meet as many Aborigine people as possible. The National Assembly hoped that Ku-ring-gai will be able to make arrangements in this direction, and it feels that this opportunity of a visit from Hand of the Cause, Mr. Enoch Olinga, should be well used for teaching and publicity. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any report of that purpose that Mr. Olinga met with a group of Aborigines in Ku-ring-gai. I don't know if any other members of the Baha'i community, those who were there and present at that time, they saw such a meeting was held and what happened, what the result was. So advertising continued in newspapers and display box and the Linfield station. Members were travel teaching to Tonga, New Guinea, and South Australia, Victoria, Maji, and Darwin. And books were donated to Tarahumara Library. In 1971 to 1972, the community was represented at 2 overseas conferences during the year in Singapore and Suva, with reports brought back from those gatherings. The Ku-ring-gai Assembly became registered as an official organization with the Ku-ring-gai Council and was represented by members when invitations were received for functions arranged by the council. The display box at the Linfield station is continued and was substituted with the placement of an entry in the Pink Pages telephone directory. Members were guest speakers at non-Baha'i functions such as Roseville Congregational Church Youth Group. During the 9-year plan, Ku-ring-gai assisted Willoughby Group towards attaining assembly status by weekly advertising in the local paper, the Clarion, and distributing 1,000 leaflets and weekly gatherings to say the prayer, remover of difficulties, 500 times at the session. Posters were displayed at local shops. The assembly became incorporated on 27th of April 1973, and the 9 members subscribed to the Memorandum Association. Members of the community were deeply involved in teaching in Ku-ring-gai as well as in other municipalities, such as Willoughby, Canterbury, through publicity in the local newspapers and the distribution of 5,000 leaflets and 500 invitations. A very successful public meeting was held. In 1976, on 20th of December 1976, the National Assembly wrote to a number of assemblies, including Ku-ring-gai, advising that after consultation on a directive from the Universal House of Justice, dated 20th of June 1976, it initiated a number of short-range plans to phase out the goals over the remaining years of the 5-year plan. The National Assembly challenged the Ku-ring-gai Assembly to raise North Sydney Bahai Community to Assembly status by April 1978. Consultation with the North Sydney and meeting with Willoughby groups continued. However, due to National Assembly's challenge, most of the community's activities were focused around supporting the North Sydney municipality and included joint feasts, public meetings, regular firesides, and publicity in newspapers. Locally, there were a series of deepenings and placement of a publicity box at Taramara Station and dawn prayers. The community's effort in North Sydney proved so successful that prior to April 1978, the time recommended by the National Assembly for the formation of North Sydney Assembly, the goal was achieved. In a letter to the Assembly in mid-1977, the National Assembly wrote, "Now that you have successfully assisted the North Sydney group to raise its numbers sufficiently to form an assembly, please consider what other meritorious extension goal you may adopt and let the National Assembly know." And then it adds, "What do you think the possibilities in Willoughby?" On 19th of July, the National Assembly wrote, "The National Assembly would like to wholeheartedly commend you for your assistance with the formation of North Sydney Assembly and encourage you to continue your cooperation with the activities of that new and precious institution through its maturing period." On 22nd of November 1977, the National Assembly wrote that it consulted on the letter from the Universal House of Justice dated 25th of September 1977. According to this letter, the Australian community is for the first time being directed to elect its delegates according to the electoral unit system, rather than by having delegates elected only in communities where spiritual assemblies have been established. That means that every Baha'i in good standing and 21 years old or more can exercise his privilege of voting for a delegate or delegates within a specific area, regardless of where he lives in Australia. The National Assembly nominates a few assemblies, including Ku-ring-gai, to organize unit convention. On 5th of December, the National Assembly writes, "Then the hand of the cause, Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum, has offered to meet with the Friends on her route to Singapore conference, asking Ku-ring-gai community to make arrangements for the meeting at Pimble Community Center."
Okay, in 1978, can you hear me okay? I assume that you can.
Yes.
In 1978, the National Assembly, on the 30th of June, wrote that at its June meeting, the National Assembly assessed the extension teaching goal assignments given to the various assemblies in June last year. Your assembly distinguished itself by competently assisting in the formation of a new assembly in B134. Further, you have, in a reasonable fashion, renewed your activities in Willoughby. Although the National Assembly is not imposing any time limit on the formation of an assembly there, we are confident that you will continue to work plan you have devised for the development of that community, and we are praying that you will achieve yet another great victory for Baha'u'llah. On 1979, on the 2nd of March, the National Assembly wrote, National Assembly extends extends to your community its warmest congratulations on having attained your 25th anniversary as a Baha'i institution in Australia. And in 1980, the Willoughby community achieved the assembly status. And in 1981, the persecution of Baha'is that started in 1979, it started to bring a large number of Baha'is to Australia as well. And that's when the influx of the Iranian Baha'is arrived in Australia. And in 1983, the community experienced one of its most active and exciting years as a result of its teaching activities. There were 3 declarations of consultation with the regional teaching committee. The community adopted Tari as its extension goal area. Now, we are getting to the stages of the later years of the Ku-ring-gai Assembly, Ku-ring-gai community. Now, they are very similar to many of the activities that happen. So I'll just go through a few more years, and then we'll go through what else we have found in the archives. In 1985, at the request of the National Assembly, proclamation was made to 2 New South Wales MP, Mr. Moore and Mr. Greiner. In 91, the Assembly decided to present the book In the Search of a Just Society to the Premier of New South Wales, Mr. Greiner. Copies of the peace message were sent to the number of dignitaries, including some broadcast personalities. And in 1995, an international food festival, an afternoon of fun and game, was organized at the Gordon Library to celebrate the birth of Baha'u'llah on the 12th of November. Members were asked to invite their friends, neighbors, and colleagues. In 96, the Assembly set the goal of the 3-year plan and decided to review its achievements periodically. It had meetings with members of the National Assembly, auxiliary board members, and its assistants. And in 97, Mr. David Hoffman, a founding member of the Universal House of Justice, spoke to the community, giving an illuminating talk on what the Baha'i faith means to the world. There was also a North FM radio station, which was giving a temporary license to promote local news and activities. Ku-ring-gai, in collaboration with Hornsby, applied for and was granted a half-an-hour airtime on Sunday mornings to talk about the faith and promote its activities in Ku-ring-gai and Hornsby. And in 98, the community had a fair share in teaching and proclamation of the Indigenous people. 6 youth and 1 adult participated in Aboriginal Sports Festival and 7 Sisters Teaching Project. The community hosted 9 non-Baha'i ladies, 8 of them Indigenous people from Australia, from Hamburg artist group over a weekend. It resulted in establishing a wonderful relationship. One of the ladies declared her faith on her return home. The community adopted a service project called Friends of Elaine Cove Park, and some members participated in the Ursula and Nigel teaching project in Newcastle. And in 2000, many activities happened, including organizing public meetings on human rights, on interfaith forums, regular fireside, devotional meetings, social activities, and promote fellowship, love, and unity among the members of the community and participating in the Ku-ring-gai Community Fair. The community also held a befitting local memorial service for Hand of the Cause, Amatul Bahar Rohiyeh Khanam, and a memorial meeting for the members of the House of Justice, Mr. Adib Taherzadeh. Now, the rest of the history in the last 20 years or so, it's very similar to the rest of the Australian communities, activities on core activities and children education, study circles, and JYs, and devotional meetings, etc. Well, I'd like to, there's a few archival items, newspaper clips. Unfortunately, we don't have the dates on them, so if anybody can recognize any of them, which year, then that would be great. But I doubt it. So there were a lot of these items, clippings in the archives that we could find. And here's one that it's returned from Mr. Bolton from Holy Land, and there was a talk there. I don't know anything else you can mention. Jasmine in the Baha'i fashion is another interesting one. There is this one, which is this one, because I don't know these ones. So some Mark Towers from America visited. That's the photo on the right-hand side there. And Richard, yeah, members of the National Assembly, yeah, local assembly here. Anyway, friends, I think we've got a number of these ones, and we really don't know the dates, so we're trying to figure it out. And this one, you wanna?
This is one of the pamphlets that they here. They had about 5,000 of this one. They used it to promote the faith in I think it was in North first, and then it was something like this for community of Willoughby as well. So just thinking about 5,000 of these ones have been distributed to the houses, and big effort for a small community. There's such a big effort.
Very good. And finally, we find this funny one. I think this is a photo of an advertisement in one of the newspapers. I think it's Mosman Daily, and it's using the Baha'i House of Worship to sell cars. Graham, I think that's all we wanted to present, but we really like to know if anybody has any more information or any photos that can really share with us, or let us know what if there's anything else that we can add to this to make this complete. As you know, it's not very complete, so we missed bits and pieces from certain years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
much, Azizeh and Farin, for that. Everybody's clapping. You can see there's some hands going on. Look, so this is the first time that we've had one of these community histories presented. And Azizeh said that they had trouble finding photos to put with their story. And we can learn a lot, not only about Ku-ring-gai itself, but about the challenges we have of putting together local histories. And at the end, we found that they had been collecting the press clippings, but not keeping the place of publication or the date, which renders them quite hard to use. And someone has chatted, I think Citare has pointed out that we can now use Trove. One member of your community could go to Trove and, or depending on the date of those clippings, but you could find out what they are. I've had a lot of thoughts while you had presented your community history, and I'll share just one or two, and then I'll open up to questions and comments from others. It occurs to me that when we look at the history of local communities in Australia, there's a number of facets to them. One is the, in a sense, the internal life of the community, the experience of feasts and holy days and friendships and challenges, and what it was like to live in a small community, as many of these were. So that's an internal aspect. What was community life like? Any evidence of how it was experienced by these early believers? From 1949, struggled through the early 50s to be a group and then to form an assembly. And what were the struggles, and how did it feel to be a very small community in that way? And then the second aspect that you're presenting is the external aspect of looking at how the community related to the society around it, how it proclaimed to its leaders, how it made relations with other religious communities or with the public at large or with educational institutions. And I think you've made a start in showing us how we can dig into our materials and weave together a story that brings out not only the institutional development, but also the linkages between the members of that community and also linkages with the wider society. And you've mentioned a number of the early Australian Baha'is whose histories we don't know in great detail. People like Dorothy Rookwood and others, Doris Whiting. You mentioned the Boltons, the fact that Marriott Bolton was a founding member of about 3 or 4 different communities in New South Wales, and she helped in South Australia as well. She moved around to form these local communities. So there's so many aspects to the experience of these early Baha'i communities. So I think you've made a wonderful start. And I'd like to invite anybody who's got a question about, thanks Verna, I see your hand up there, and or some reminiscences and recollections of some of these early members of this community. So let's start with Verna, and let's see how we can explore what it is to discover our own community life and put it together, because we'll all want to do that in our own way for our communities. Verna, please make a start with your thoughts and comments.
Just a comment. Stanley Bolton was one of the people who used to visit Tamworth Baha'is on a regular basis. I'm not sure when he started, but he was doing it into the 60s, I know. But the other thing about Enoch Alinga, his visit to Tamworth, I had a bit of trouble sending a comment on that, but he met with the Duncan family who pioneered to Tamworth, who taught me the faith. And I didn't meet Enoch Alinga, of course, but he did meet a very prominent, respected Aboriginal elder. Her name was Florence Munro, and she's still very well known in the area. And there's lovely photos of him with the Duncans and with Florence and her family. Thank you.
Thank you, Verna.
I'm not sure that David Podger is still with us or not, but Neil Podger is here. He didn't talk about his family and who else became Baha'i in his family. I'm wondering whether Neil can talk a bit about it.
Ahmed, that was quite a broad question that you're asking.
Well, he was very young when he became Baha'i. I'm wondering whether his brothers or cousins were introduced to the faith.
All right, let's just check that David showed that. I think Sue's checking that David got that. The question is, who else in your family became Baha'is after you became a Baha'i? That's a question to David Podger. And then I think, do we have a question from Mohsen after that?
I just wanted a quick note about Enoch Alinga. When he came to Australia, I was working at the airport, and actually Randwick community asked me to meet him when he arrived. I was on duty, so I actually went and met him, and it was a big show that I was still in my overalls, and I'm meeting this beautiful man coming from the airplane, and actually I took him to a taxi and I sent him to our house, and later on that evening I took him to La Perouse, and he met at the cultural center in La Perouse, and there was quite a number of Aboriginal people, and he was delighted to meet them. And of course, most of Randwick community were there. That's all Farin wanted to know about this point. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because it was no report. I couldn't find that there was a meeting between him and some Aborigines in Ku-ring-gai or not. But thank you. That's good.
Do you have any photos by any chance?
No, we don't have photos, sorry.
Thank you for the question. And now, David, did you have an answer to that question you were asked by Ahmed He just wanted to know who else in your family became. And Ashley, after that, I'd like you to ask your question, please.
Excuse me, you mentioned before the name of Dorothy Rockwood. This lady in our Hornsby Bahai Center, the LSA put the name of the big hall for this lady because we respect the first person pioneering in Hornsby. I want to say, yeah, respect.
Thank you.
Thank you
That
for that,
explains
Marie.
that the local assembly of Ku-ring-gai,
Yes.
you know, dissolved because she would have been pioneer to Hornsby. Thank you for that. That's
Yeah.
Well, here I am.
Yeah. Speak.
This is David Podger here. You were asking about relatives. Well, it went back a generation. My mother became a Baha'i. She made me a second generation Baha'i. Then my dear brother became a Baha'i about 10 years after me, and all of his family have served the faith. I've got a dear grandchildren. Let's see, from Ethel. That's my son's son and his wife. Goodness me, there must be 20 or 30 of them.
Oh. Yeah.
There's quite a few. I don't think we're going to die out.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that answer, David. Thank you for the question. Ahmed, thank you, Ruhi June, for that explanation about Dorothy Rookwood. I hope we can find out more about Dorothy's life. She was an important member of the community when I was a child and gave me much encouragement, so I remember her fondly. Now, I want to check if Ashley is there to ask your question. Ashley, are you able to come online and ask?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, as a new Baha'i, it was Azizeh, thank you so much and Farin, thank you so much. As a new Baha'i, it was inspiring to hear about the efforts of the Ku-ring-gai community to grow the local Baha'i community in the early years. Can you please summarize what were the main activities and actions they took to grow the faith? Thank you.
I did a lot of promotion through the local newspapers, through the box which they had at the train station, and every week they were changing what kind of activities were there, so inviting people. They also had invitations. They printed invitations when there was a speaker coming from overseas or somebody in Australia giving a talk on the Baha'i faith. So mostly at that time, it was through newspapers and dropping pamphlets at boxes and something like that. And later on, then they had, the Baha'i community had the opportunity to use a radio station to talk about the Baha'i faith and also the activities which the Baha'i would have at that time, and inviting the general public there.
And also, I think public meetings were the main portals of people coming to the community, whether they were devotionals or speaker-oriented or some topics of some sort, I think was there. But I think we could ask David Podger, who lived in Ku-ring-gai, to tell us more, because you lived at that period of time, so you can tell us exactly what happened.
Yeah. That's going back too far, mate.
Your mind is as sharp as ever, David.
He knows how to answer.
I lived in Taramara, but
Okay.
it's not worth asking about.
Thank Thank you so much, Azizeh and Farin, for a lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question from Azizeh and
Yes.
Farin? Mr. and Mrs. Bolton were in Ku-ring-gai, according to your things. Did they talk about their weekenders place in Yarimbul at all in any of the conversations they had with the community? Did you go into that much detail at all?
No, I didn't go through that much details. Whatever I picked up were something like, the annual annual report of the communities.
Nothing about, nothing about Yarimbul activities that they were organizing, things like that?
No, there was nothing in the material which I was looking to pick up bits and pieces from the history of the Bahai community of Ku-ring-gai. Those things, I think there would be conversation between some individuals, but there was not mentioned or appeared anywhere which I looked for it.
I think later on.
Farin, please go ahead. Farin, speak into your microphone, please.
Actually moved out of Ku-ring-gai. Sorry, I think when they moved out of Ku-ring-gai, that's when a lot of the activities happened around Yarimbul as well. I'm talking about Stanley and Marriott Bolton. So they moved out of Ku-ring-gai after a while. So I think a lot of activities happened after that as well, Ahmed.
Now, Barry, can I check whether you had a question in there earlier? I'm sorry if I missed you.
I'm sorry, were you talking to me?
Just checking whether you had a question, Barry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to mention that I'm in the house that we bought from Joe Salter. He went to Devonport in Tasmania from here. And I was questioning, did Azizeh used to live in Neutral Bay at one stage when we first came to? I'm sorry?
We were in the same assembly in North Sydney.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're as beautiful now as you were then.
And you're as cute as you were there.
But it's lovely seeing you. I thought that was a fantastic presentation by everybody, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you so very, very much.
It was nice seeing you again.
My pleasure.
Barry, thank you for always coming online from Broken Hill. It's wonderful to have you online.
Thanks.
We'll bring this session to a close fairly soon. I just want to check, you see there are a couple of comments that have been made, whether Verna Podger knows something about Dorothy Rookwood, and Shirley has chatted from South Australia that she and Alan were on the first Willoughby Assembly. I don't know if you've got any extra things that you want to say about that, or save them for another time, because we will have a session. Well, maybe this might be the right time, but we'll finish in a few minutes. So I just want to see if there's any last questions for our presenters tonight.
Interestingly,
Dorothy Rookwood, you've been dobbed in by Kath.
Interestingly, that comment about Willoughby Assembly, Brian Whitehead was on that assembly, so that links the two talks together. He was on the Willoughby Assembly with us. So that goes back to David's reference to Brian's pioneering.
Alan, what is your recollection of Brian Whitehead? Because most of the people on this call don't know who you're talking about. Give us a word picture of Brian Whitehead.
He was eccentric. Unusual. Very unusual, Brian.
How lovely to see Shirley.
Hello, Barry.
I believe he lives in Victoria at the moment. Last time I caught up with him was at one of the intercontinental conferences was held in Sydney. Yes, had very strong ideas about certain aspects of the faith. Certainly was an enthusiastic supporter of the Baha'i community. One of the things we did in Willoughby was to paint a picture of the temple in enamel and have it mounted over the Chatswood railway station. It was about 2 meters by 2 meters in height, And Brian painted that all himself with a makeshift spray gun. It was quite an incredible feat of artistic expertise. Yeah, we had a lot of interesting times in those 4 years at Willoughby.
Thanks, Alan.
Hello, I can see Ivan there. Hello, Ivan.
Hello, Ivan. Nice to see you.
Yep.
Friends, I think we'll bring this this part of the evening to a close. I thank you all. I thank the presenters, and thank you so much for being part of this presentation tonight.